In my last video about maps that got cut from the final game, I was talking about the sewers map that got split between two different maps, being the Grave of Saints and the Gutter. And that map consisted of bigger map pieces with their location already configured in world space, which made very easy to infer the correct location of each asset in that map. This time the map is called Dragon's House in the game files. And this is a map that got almost completely discarded in the final game, having only a few pieces used in the final version, becoming the Dark Chasm of Old in Dark Souls 2, where you fight the Dark Lurker. And this time, the map consists of 3 bigger map pieces, them being the Graveyard, the Bridge, and the Cavern, and a huge amount of smaller pieces being tunnels, passages, and decorations that would have been scattered around the map. But the thing here is that none of the assets were in world space, which means that I also had to infer the position, rotation, and height of every single one of the pieces, which was a task that ended up being harder than I anticipated. In the case of the tunnels, for example, I draw the outline of each one of them so I can see which one fits where, but even though I linked every possible piece that could be linked, there was still something missing. And this is because there are 3 more assets in this map that doesn't have a 3D model, and they could be literally anything, of any size, having any type of geometry, which makes the task basically impossible. So what I ended up doing to solve this situation and finish assembling all tunnels was finding pieces of the final version of the map in Dark Souls 2 that fits relatively well with the geometry of the removed map, and stitch them together in a way that matches the sizes. And I got to this final layout, with one side of the mountain being the graveyard, the other side of the mountain being the bridge, and the cavern, which is the longest part of the map, starting within the mountain itself, given that the cavern naturally descends. Now, just like in the last time that I restored the map, this time I also haven't touched the textures. So every texture that you see in this video is native from the S2. Nothing in here was changed. This is so I keep the information about the map the most transparent that I can. So it's only natural that there will be some parts of the map without any textures as well, and when you see them, they will be just flat white surfaces. However, there is in fact one single texture that I have changed, being the skybox texture, because this map also came with skybox and ocean, but its skybox was textureless, and in game that ends up generating a very abrasive effect to the eyes. So I chose the skybox from the Forest of Fallen Giants to use in here, for 4 reasons. 1, because like I just said, a textureless skybox hurts the eyes. 2, because some of the structures in this map look a little bit like ones in the Forest of Fallen Giants. 3, because I found this model from an enemy that belongs in there as well. And 4, because this skybox is just gorgeous, man. So without further ado, let's go to the exploration. So here we are at the start of the map. If you've seen the last video, you already noticed that there's a pattern going on here, where the start of the map will always be a tunnel cut in half like this, for unused maps that is, which was exactly the case for the sewers map as well. So evidently, for being the same exact thing, this would also be the start of the map. Actually, the location itself collaborates a lot with this pattern as well, in case we were to look at things from another perspective. So that being said, let's explore. The first thing you see when exiting the tunnel is this bifurcation, with stairs leading below and stairs leading above. And this path leading down is blocked by these rocks, but actually there's a prototype of a path for the continuation of this path that I'll show later in the video. Basically, the devs were clearly studying a way to use this as a path leading somewhere, maybe an illusory wall or something. We can't really know for sure. Climbing these stairs and getting to this first part of the cut map, which is the cemetery. One thing that you'll notice, and I think it's very relevant to do this observation, is that if you take a look at my steps, the collision materials are already mapped. I walk on dirt and it makes the correct sound. I hit the stone in here and it also makes the correct sound. And even the wood of this tree, there's this very big tree right here, If I hit it, it will make the correct sound as well. This is because around a third of the collisions of this map already came with the map. So here where I'm stepping, for example, this is native from the removed map piece, and it wasn't made by my collision baking process, which is very interesting because these are already the correct materials put here by the devs long ago. Here there's this textureless square on the ground, which I presume to be made out of stone or something like it, maybe to be used as a secret passage in some way, as a similar one that I remember from Bloodborne, but we can't really be sure of anything, because there's little to no information on this. And another very interesting thing about this specific part of the cemetery is that if you walk right by the edge of this place, you see that there's collision in there. And I can climb in here in this place that is invisible. But actually, if you look at the collision data, this place that I'm stepping onto was supposed to be a tree or some kind of roots or something like it, which was supposed to be present in the map, but the 3D model for this doesn't exist. So maybe this one can be one of the 3 assets without a model as well. There's room for speculation in here. Now a little more to the right, you can see that there's a hole in the mountain, and we will get to that place very soon. It stays right after the entrance for the cavern system, which is this type of altar, this bull head right here, like very sinister. I imagine that the player would have to interact with something in here for it to open this passage, maybe something like this. Now here, getting to this more open-ish part of the cavern is where we find the main bifurcation for the map, down below this place, where you can choose to either go to the bridge, or what I presume that it was the way to the bridge, or access the main cavern. This place is still all native collisions, by the way. If you pay attention to the ground, you can see that there's a bunch of broken objects in it, which are not loose decorations across the map. They actually came together with this huge map piece we're standing on. And you can also see that they all came with correct textures, which is kind of funny given that the majority of walls and surfaces in here don't have albedo. Only the normal maps are present in this place. Here's the huge hole in the wall that we had seen previously. But before getting closer to it, let's choose the path that leads to the bridge. We'll be back soon. We'll be crossing one of the parts that I stitched the cut assets to the released assets that are present in the S2 launch, so we can correctly get to the bridge. Maybe some have already recognized this part, this general structure from the S2, or maybe not, because I don't know if that many people have killed the Dark Lurker, or even gone through the map in the base game, but this is one of the structures. Something interesting about this place, or rather these general structures on the bridge, is that architecturally speaking, I think these little houses are very similar to the architecture in the Lost Bastille. So who knows, maybe this could have been some kind of alternative way to access the Bastille between the Forest of Fallen Giants and the Lost Bastille. Something that maybe was scrapped from the final game and they ended up making you go to the Lost Bastille by bird. because everybody knows by now that when From Software has a hard time connecting two maps, they either make you go by bird or by coffin. Like, we can't be sure, it's just a theory, but this behavior kind of goes all the way to the DLC in Elden Ring. We're getting to the end of the bridge, and there's seemingly nothing in here. You can even see that the bridge model itself is cutted very abruptly. So maybe the idea was to have some wreckage preventing the player from proceeding, or maybe just the simple fact that the bridge isn't finished. Anyway, let's get back to the cavern system so we can explore the other path options we have. So here to the left there will be another tunnel, which is the second way we're going through, taking us to the actual main cavern. And this exact spot right here wasn't stitched by me. You can see that the vertex between both surfaces match perfectly. So this was one of the parts of the puzzle that I had to assemble, combining the outline from both tunnels. But in the way there will still be some unused parts stitched to some released parts, of course, so we can get to the cavern making use of a good amount of cut assets. You're likely already recognizing this place from the S2 if you've been to the Chasm. Sometimes I even ask myself if this is not the correct skybox by coincidence, because these angles are so nice. You can see some small spoiler in this window of the size of the area we're going to explore soon. Now this door right here is very curious because I ended up covering it because it doesn't lead anywhere at all. Geographically this door doesn't make any sense because it would either end up in this wall right here or in the opposite wall. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to deciphering what was the dev's intent with this doorway. Maybe it was supposed to be one of those DS2 exclusive doors that you open and there's only a single skeleton inside or something. This is another question that we won't have any answers for. Here once again we have another stitch between unused and released assets. And by the way, if you remember the very last part of the series video, blood on the ground doesn't necessarily mean blood on the ground. This is usually unmapped material, or some DS2 material that doesn't have a direct translation to Night Rain, which I made it fall back to blood, because it's easier to spot. And finally, the main entrance to the cavern, with these braziers and torches around. And it's also noticeable that the reduction on the amount of textures in here is big. This is an elevator that would have been used as a shortcut to get back up here. We'll check it out once we get down below. It will be very obvious when you see it. Again, we face two options of paths to take, to the left and to the right, and in this room to the right, where there's a dead end, I've decided to place this big thorax from a dragon or another beast, simply by the reason that the size of the thorax is the same exact size of the room. So keep in mind that this might not be the intended location for it. I've also placed this same asset in another upcoming place because I also thought to be a very acceptable place for it. So instead of not placing it anywhere, I've decided to place it in both places. It's also an incredibly detailed piece for a cut asset in my opinion. Really odd thing happening in here. What happens is that we've descended so much inside this cavern that I got to the sea level. This is actually something fairly common to happen in From Software games, but they usually hide this using draw groups and display groups, so you don't see the sea level like this when you're inside caverns or inside places where they simply don't want you to see it. But it's something that does happen indeed, you just don't see it in game because it's hidden. And having 40 insight does not reveal this in game either, unfortunately. So this was also something not added by me in any way. Because I didn't change the sea level, it's still at height 0. So that's a random fact about display groups.
I am under the water. Please help me.
Yet another bifurcation, so naturally I'll just follow the non-correct path. It takes us to this really deep hole, which by the way is a very common thing in the final version of the Chasm in Dark Souls 2. We have a lot of little pits like this in it. And here is just a dead end, even because in the base game you wouldn't be able to make this jump. So despite this doorway being blocked, in Dark Souls 2 you have the mechanic of breaking these wood structures in this kind of situation, so this is very likely the intent in here as well. Therefore, we will traverse this with some cheap magic. In a parallel and somewhat unrelated subject, if you were to analyze this cut map and analyze the last cut map as well, it's noticeable that both of them are very extensive cavern systems, so maybe that's the reason they got cut from the game, because maybe the devs didn't want this type of level to be a recurrent thing in the game. They might have simply judged cavern levels as unfun to explore and scrapped the idea. So maybe that's the reason they got cut after all, we'll never know. I believe there might have been a bonfire in here, because in the base game we already see bonfires inside barracks like this in Brightstone Cove Seldora, for example. Not in the Scholar version though. This version has removed the bonfire from inside the barrack for some reason, but we have this in the base PS3 and 360 version of Dark Souls 2. Well, a detail that I ended up not explaining before ended up going unnoticed by me because I assumed that everybody knows about this, but this is not a nice assumption to make, because maybe there's someone out there who doesn't know. But basically, every time you see those 2D polygons intertwined like this is supposed to be vegetation. Plants, grass, all things like it. It's very common in every video game actually to make extensive use of this, because this creates an illusion that really looks like vegetation. And it's still used to this day in Elden Ring, for example, due to optimization. This statue right here was actually placed by me. It came together with the cut map, and it was another one of those assets that I didn't know exactly where to place. And then I concluded that this statue roughly matches this room for being some kind of underground graveyard. I even thought about placing it in the graveyard above before the cavern, especially that white square on the ground beneath the big tree. But I think it doesn't really make sense to have two statues beside one another, this one and the bull one, so I ended up placing it in here. Again, keep in mind that this might not be the intended location for it. So remember that elevator we came across all the way up there? This is exactly where it leads to. And I think that the intent of this elevator is one of those Dark Souls 1-ish things, where you're supposed to unlock it from below so we can add like a shortcut. This way you go up the elevator and use the first bonfire of the cavern, which I assume it would be up there. I think the overall level design was probably thought around this. And now we're getting to what is, in my opinion, the most interesting part of the map. What you're seeing in this window type thing, I'll give this little spoiler because I think everybody knows by now that there's a giant dragon sleeping or dead in there. And this is the tail that we are seeing from the other side of the window. I'll even quickly enter in here to show the sheer size of the beast. Of course, normally you wouldn't be able to do this in the game. It gave me the impression that maybe this is even bigger than the ancient dragon. Here's another view angle for the paw of the dragon. Paw, is that correct? Another one of those words that I can't spell. But yeah, normally you wouldn't be able to jump in here either. By the way, thank you to everyone in the last video who taught me how to say backface culling, because now I can correctly spell the word culling, and I'm really happy about it. And here we finally get to the neck and the head of this huge dragon in this map. And actually, this enormous dead dragon on the ground was supposed to be a skeleton. Initially, I was having some doubts about it, if this were supposed to be a dragon skeleton or not, due to the way the devs made the model itself. It gets kind of inconclusive when we have evidence pointing to both. But it was actually supposed to be bones indeed, because I found this type of plate in the cut map, which reads Koryu no Hone, which means ancient dragon bone or ancient dragon bones. I don't really know if it's plural or singular, but I think this confirms that this dragon was supposed to be made out of bones. Also, because of what we saw in the cinematic trailer for Dark Souls 2, where there's a scene that looks very much like this cave, in which the protagonist is exploring a cave and he ends up getting out of this dragon's mouth. And I believe it's probably this place right here where we at. What got me impressed over this piece is the actual size of this dragon, which in my opinion is very, very big, maybe even bigger than the ancient dragon. I think it's maybe the same size as Greyrow, or not. On second thought, I think Greyrow is actually larger. But If Elden Ring had to take inspiration out of something to make Greyroll, now we know where it came from. And before I leave this part right here, it's very relevant to inform that a thing that you can observe is that this very open area behind the dragon is not accessible from here. And this is a very interesting level design quirk, because in order to access this area behind the dragon, you would have to come starting from another map. And I'll show what I'm talking about later. But basically, there's no way to get there from here. This place right here smells very much like boss fight. I think if there's a boss in this map, this is very likely the arena. And it was here in this boss arena that I've decided to put this large, giant, tree-like thing that came with the map. It's another one of those loose assets, but the reason is basically because of this hole in the ceiling being the only place in the map where this tree could physically get out of. It reminds a little bit of Shrine of Amana, but this also might not be the official intended place for it. But I think it looks sick nonetheless. It was the best spot I found to place it. Exiting the boss arena, we get to this very weird place, which looks like something made to drain water for some reason. I don't know exactly what's the intent for it, but this is basically the end of the map, at least for the cavern part. There's nothing more to explore further in here, so remember when I said that in order to access that open area in the cavern behind the dragon, we would have to access it through another map? So, this is the place where we would enter from another map, in this elevator-like structure. If you also remember this asset, this is the one I've placed in that room up above in the start of the cave map. And this was the second location where I've placed it, where I think it's minimally acceptable as well for this big dragon rib to be located at. Or maybe it can even be the model they made for the ribcage of the dragon itself, but we can't really know for sure. I personally think that if this was really supposed to be the dragon's ribcage, we would find at least some other bones besides this one. Given the sheer size of this area behind the dragon body, there could be anything in here really. There could be even a boss fight, I don't know. But I found space for this little camp, also made out of loose assets that came in the conversion of the removed map. And I think this might be a okay place to put them, because they also don't fit anywhere else in the cave. And we can only speculate about it, but maybe there could be some NPCs scavenging for the dragon's bones. We really can't know for sure. So if I were to evaluate, I think that this is the part of the map that got most influenced by my interpretation of what this place could be, given that I was looking for a place to put every single loose asset, and I ended up finding this place. And here we are back once again at the dragon's head. Now in the cemetery region once again, you might remember that I talked about a prototype path past those rocks downstairs, that the devs were probably studying the use case for it. So let's see what I was talking about in here. You end up facing this little doorway. And this doorway would take us to that other doorway far ahead. And what do we have to see there exactly? Well, kind of nothing really. For me, it's conclusive that the distance between those two doorways itself is the only thing that links them really. But that's basically it. So, thank you so much for watching the video this far, and I hope you enjoyed the exploration of this cut map. I would appreciate if you leave a like if you liked the video, and I see you in the next one.